Crash of the Titans was a bit of an oddball of a game. It took a beloved platforming franchise in a direction no one thought it would be taken. I do wonder what the thought process behind that was. Who would look at a series of linear 3D platformers and think that the beat-em-up route is the best way to go? It's like looking at a microwave and thinking, you know what this needs? Wheels. It's just not really a natural next step to take in the evolution of, well, anything really. But despite managing to confuse every kid who played this game, I think they kinda pulled it off. Crash of the Titans was pretty good. It was a mite repetitive, and everything that was supposed to be Crash Bandicoot was butchered beyond recognition, but it was a pretty fun game. I liked it. I didn't love it, but I liked it. I don't know if Titans was considered a success, but it was followed by a direct sequel, Crash Mind Over Mutant. Like Titans, Mind Over Mutant confused me as a kid. Not because of the beat-em-up stuff, by that point I had wrapped my brain around that bit, but I was confused by quite a few other things that Mind Over Mutant was doing. Looking back, I think I was just an easily confused child. I used to think that yesterday was a day of the week, but I couldn't figure out where it was in the week. I used to list the days of the week and try to figure out when the hell yesterday happens. There's only 7 days in a week. You've got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. How does yesterday fit into that? Turns out, it doesn't. It just means the day before today. And I think that whole saga speaks for itself. I was a dumbass. But even despite my immense confusion, I remember thinking Mind of a Mutant was just as good as Crash of the Titans. But I only have 3 words for my child self. Is it really? And my child self responds, I don't know, you tell me. Fine, let's tuck into Crash Mind Over Mutant. The game begins with a short teaser that hints at what the game will be about, and then we're dropped inside a house. I'm presuming it's Crash's house, but you never know. Crash does strike me as the kind of Bandicoot who would break into someone's house and not realize that people generally don't like it when you do that. You're not really given an instruction or any direction at all, so naturally everyone's instinct will be to snoop around and rummage through the junk. Who knows what trinkets you might find? A haunted board game, an old cup of tea, a secret door that leads to an underground abattoir filled with origami cranes. The sky's the limit. But unfortunately all that's there is the opportunity to look at locked concept art and skins and stats and such. Since we haven't actually started playing yet, none of this crap is unlocked, so all that's left to do is leave the house. We are then tasked with talking to Coco, who through the medium of charming children's puppet show, informs Crash that she's trying to repair the Eye of the Doominator to turn it into an all-in-one mega entertainment system. It'll even dispense butter. Beat that, Sony! In order to get this done, Coco asks Crash to help her out by finding her lost parts that are scattered around the island. And just like that, we're off. What's immediately obvious is that Mind Over Mutant is taking a very different approach to structure when compared to Titans. Titans was split into 20 episodes with shockingly horrendous names, and while they were connected via the context of the story, they were separate, individual levels. Mind Over Mutant abandons that in favour of story missions that take place in what is essentially one giant interconnected level. I've seen this sort of thing done before. Sometimes it works well, other times not so much. It's been so long since I last played this game that I can't actually remember if this game does it well or not, so I'm looking forward to being either pleasantly surprised or shit-sprayingly disgusted. Our first mission, Find Coco's Parts, takes us through a short and simple loop to get us acquainted with Crash's gameplay. Crash plays near identically to how he did in Titans. He's got the same attacks and combos, his movement is pretty much the same, it's barely changed at all. He has lost his ability to do that weird aerial spin hover move from Titans, but that wasn't really adding anything to the platforming in that game. All it did was allow the developers to spread everything out over enormous gaps. In Mind Over Mutant, Crash can't do that, so all of the platforming is more compacted down, dense, and I think that's for the best. It feels more focused and concentrated. Sometimes that's what you've got to do. Make things small and manageable. Remove all distractions and focus on the good stuff. Not that this platforming is especially good or anything, it's not deserving of an award, but it is still simple and relatively fun platforming. They've even added in this underground crawling mechanic, which is, you know, it's not something I support, but it's better than nothing. Bandicoots do that in real life, so it's good to see that the series is finally making an effort to incorporate that. Just kidding, Crash did it first and did it better. Other than collecting a bit of underground mojo, this whole digging thing is worthless. But this first mission did confirm that, at least in terms of Crash's solo gameplay, Mind Over Mutant is pretty on par with Titans. So far, so good. Our second mission, Find Engine, begins when he attacks the Bandicoots while Coco and Crunch are distracted by their swanky new headsets that turned up in the mail randomly. Crash and Aku Aku head out to confront Engine and essentially tell him to get the fuck off the island. This time we take a different loop and get introduced to the Titans. You would think that much like Crash, the Titans gameplay probably hasn't changed all that much. But actually, it's improved quite a bit. At a first glance, it seems like more of the same. Similar mechanics, you jack them and take control of them and their super strong moves. That part is the same. But the thing that sucked major balls about the Titans in Titans was that they were very limited in their abilities. They had a light attack, a heavy attack, a block, and a super strong fuck you attack. But that was it. That was all they were able to do. They couldn't even jump. This meant that a lot of the time in Titans you would be abandoning your Titans because it's physically impossible for them to progress any further. But Mind Over Mutant said no. No! No Titan left behind! In Mind Over Mutant, there were quite a few changes made to how the Titans work that really improved them overall. Firstly, they were given the ability to jump. Their jumps aren't particularly high or long, but god damn it, it's a start. You can only fly once your feet are off the ground. Take the leap, spread your wings, and shoot for the stars. Go get 'em, Tiger! But what's more useful than being able to jump is that Crash is now able to store Titans. I don't know where he's keeping them, they're too big to fit in his pockets, and they're certainly too big to fit in his ass, but somehow he's storing them. At will, Crash can store and resummon a Titan, which allows him to get through platforming sections that Titans can't make it through without having to abandon his Titan like an unwanted baby. That's such a good change, and it's very helpful, because a lot of Titans are now actually crucial for traversing this interconnected world. A handful have very specific abilities that interact with the environment. The Ratsicle can sneeze freeze certain bodies of water, the TK can use telekinesis to influence the environment, the Grimly can slow down time, and the Rhino Roller can roll fast as fuck. Being able to store them means you can easily carry Titans back to areas you've already visited and use their powers to access new areas. The Titans are a lot more versatile here in Mind Over Mutant. They can fight and they can explore, even though some Titans, like the TK, are really shit at combat. After Engine gets his ass handed to him, Crash and Aku Aku look through a telescope and see that Coco and Crunch have been turned into hypnotized feral monsters by those wacky headsets they put on earlier. And this is the whole premise of the story. Cortex reunited with Embryo, who, by the way, is absolutely glorious in this game. Embryo's sense of humor combined with all the different animation styles is pretty great. It's hard to be mad at how they went about giving this game some personality, even if the cutscenes are the only personality this game has. Anyway, Cortex and Embryo devise a scheme to create a metric fuckton of these headsets, called NVs, which they distribute across the globe. They turn those who wear them into mindless mutant monster slaves, and with their army of mindless mutant monster slaves, they intend to conquer the world, I guess. Honestly, besides the betraying of Uka Uka, this is a pretty stock standard Crash story. It's not even the first time Coco and Crunch have been hypnotized. Crash's mission is clear: save Coco and Crunch, and give Cortex a slap on the wrist for being naughty again. As a story, I can't really complain. It's classic Crash Bandicoot evil scientist mutant army nonsense. I can complain about having to rescue Coco and Crunch though. They make up 2/3 of the boss fights in this game, and they're terrible. Coco's fight might just be one of the worst fights in the whole series, even when put up against Crash 2's Cortex. It's just really easy and really lame. And Crunch's fight isn't a whole lot better than that. Don't get me wrong, getting to jack Crunch and ride him like a horse has been a fantasy of mine ever since I first laid eyes on him way back in Wrath of Cortex. But this fight? It isn't even really a fight. You're just trashing the joint, which was already full of trash when we arrived. The final boss against Cortex is probably the best one in the game, and that's saying something because it's dog shit. Besides the fact that this was clearly inspired by someone on the development team having a very specific muscular growth fetish, it's just beating the fuck out of a bunch of pathetic enemies until the game lets you do a little spin and slam down on a self-destruct button. It's pretty bad. Even Croc has better boss fights than this. Beyond the boss fights, the actual pure gameplay is pretty decent. It's about on par with Titans. In fact, I'd probably even give Mind Over Mutant the edge simply because the Titans can jump in this game. In isolation, the gameplay is not that bad, which is why it's so crushing when you experience just how poorly this game is structured. I mentioned it earlier, but I'll mention it again because I swear, these days people have the attention span of a moth with ADHD. Titans is broken up into 20 distinct levels, whereas the entirety of Mind Over Mutant takes place in one giant interconnected world. Progress is dictated by completing missions, which most of the time just involve reaching a specific location. In a sense, Mind Over Mutant is basically a 3D Metroidvania. The world branches out in many ways, but some routes require you to have a certain Titan on you to move forward, much like how a Metroidvania would function. But because of how it's built and where the missions send you, there's a lot, and I mean a lot, of backtracking. You find yourself going back and forth through the same areas whose platforming challenges and layout do not change at any point. You go through this fucking ice puzzle at least 6 times. It's barely even a puzzle. And it's not like there are a huge amount of areas, there are only 8. That's less than half of the amount of levels in Titans. In Mind Over Mutant, you have to go through each of its locations multiple times because the missions throw you to opposite ends of the map in a way that seems deliberately tedious. It's almost as if the developers realized there wasn't enough game in this game and needed to make it as drawn out as possible with what limited levels they had. But you can tell towards the end of the game that they realized they went too far with it and just start teleporting you around. At the end of the penultimate mission, Aku Aku utters the line, "Uka Uka somehow powered the Doominator," to which you're then teleported. They don't even bother to explain, they just throw that in at the end. It's so obviously sloppy and really poorly structured. It's literal repetition, and it really hurts the experience of playing the game. Imagine if the other Crash games did this. Imagine if the first game made you go through Jungle Rollers 5 times, with it being the same every single time you went through it. And what's with talking to NPCs? What is that adding to the game? It's not like it's adding anything of value, it's bullshit. One other thing this game does do pretty well though is the presentation. It's not bad at all. It looks pretty similar to Crash of the Titans, only they did away with the sarcastic amount of motion blur, which means you can actually look at the environments without too much trouble. Unfortunately, none of the locations are anywhere near as unique or grandiose as they were in Crash of the Titans, so there isn't anything as worthy of being looked at, but at least you can look at it. I will say though that the music overall is much better in Mind Over Mutant. The songs are catchier and more memorable, but they still fit the whole style that Titan's soundtrack went for. It's not the best soundtrack in the series, but it's not bad. Beyond that though, Mind Over Mutant doesn't have a whole lot going for it. It isn't a bad game, I've played plenty of games that are actually bad, and Mind Over Mutant shits all over them. But it's definitely a weaker game than Crash of the Titans, and by extension most other games in the series. While Mind Over Mutant did improve the actual Titan gameplay and had a more memorable story and cutscenes, in pretty much every other aspect, Crash of the Titans outclasses it. It was better structured, it made more sense, it was more focused, it was less repetitive, it was just a better take on this version of the Crash formula. I just don't really get what they were trying to do with Mind Over Mutant. Crash of the Titans, even with its flaws, worked. Mind Over Mutant, particularly because of its shitty structure and blatant sloppiness, just wasn't as fun to play. I may have been a stupid kid who was confused at every opportunity, but I think in the case of Mind Over Mutant, my confusion was justified. And that's all I have to say. See you next yesterday!